Hi, and welcome back to the Self-Actualization in the Age of Crisis chapter summary series. I'm your host, Ron Rivers, and today we're going to be discussing chapter 3, the 8 dignities, communication. So communication is one of the 8 dignities, is an effort to really enhance and expand our capacity to change. All communication is essentially the transference of information, right? And we are fractional observers within an informational universe. So patterns of information interacting with information. Communication is also an innate biological component of being human. So in that sense, we recognize its importance to our development as human beings, to our importance of our development of our capacity to exercise our divinity in the moment, and recognize its power and potential for transforming the human experience. So to that end, we identify and claim communication as a human dignity in alignment with the single truth and relational universe. So when we think about communication in our immediate present, the networks and tools supporting communication at a municipal, state, federal, or global scale are primarily tracked within these for-profit legacy institutions. So I really want to emphasize this point. All of us in the immediate present and from here on out leverage the internet to some extent or form, right? If you're watching this, you're using the internet, you're listening to it, and it is something that is inextricably linked to our existence in our immediate present and likely for the foreseeable future, right? So to that end, we have to question, does it make sense for the collective benefit of humanity to have a small, and I mean small because they're very monopolistic, the communications companies, cadre of companies who, let's be candid, don't focus on innovating. Primarily, they're rent seekers at this point in time because all the infrastructure is laid. Doesn't make sense to have an extractive institution for something that is so vital to the nature of being human. So to that end, a communications DAO would facilitate a global movement to a publicly owned communication system, independent of any state, independent of any corporation or syndicate. And that's extremely important for a number of reasons. One, if we look at the past decade of revolutions, right, we've seen governments proactively shut down the internet, proactively disable communications for their populace when they were trying to revolt. So we need to pull our ability to communicate with each other out of the hands of a political team, or a state, within a given moment, because it's totally out of alignment, I should say, with the relational universe, to have a single individual or group be able to diminish and deny the collective their birthrights. And we could also say the same for device manufacturing, which in many ways is incremental improvements, again, just a profit seek. We don't see tremendous innovations in smartphones. They get a little bigger, they get a little extra camera, but at the end of the day, this is something that could be dealt with by the public, for the public, in a much more efficient fashion. I feel like many communications device these days is more of a cult of personality and brand than it is actual innovation. So the DAO might seek to cooperate with existing institutions and governments, or to kind of go on its own path. But ultimately what we want to establish is networks of connectivity, again, out of any independent control. So we might leverage something like Starlink, but ideally that Starlink is something that should be a global public work, right? It doesn't make sense for a for-profit company to do that, especially when they're already receiving so many billions of dollars in subsidies from the public treasuries. So to that end, that's one specific aspect. Device manufacturer might be another one. Again, there's no real innovation in device manufacturer. It's more of a kind of a branding thing. And given that everyone needs these things to communicate, it doesn't make sense to have it take the shape of an extractive for-profit institution. I also want to emphasize that the DAO could be a big proponent and facilitator of secure communication protocols. So I think as we kind of continuously see the overreach of states in various degrees, the increasing polarization, the ever-present funding of police and military, we're cascading towards a more authoritarian kind of vision of humanity. So to that end, private communication is going to play an even more important role, especially in the lens of the transcendent spiritual project. Because as I've mentioned throughout these summary videos, we will be met with resistance on many fronts. So it's important that as self-actualizers, we have the capacity to kind of network and communicate and ideate together, free of the fear of any persecution. Ultimately, the communications DAO is one of the core components of freeing the individual from the constraints of birth lottery, right? Reducing the past's influence on the present. And that's especially true for like individuals who are born into fundamentalist religious communities where they're taught very specific things. They're not allowed to learn modern information. They're not allowed to have modern technology. No, again, as we've talked about in the child chapter, no individual parent has the right to deny the individual child access and agency within the world. Children do not exist to further, our personal beliefs. They are independent actors. So to that end, the communications DAO plays a vital role in freeing us and freeing our children from the constraints of birth lottery.